Everyone, my name is Chris McCarthy, and I'm the president of MTV Entertainment Group. Now, you may know that, but what you probably don't know is I struggled with my own mental health. But let's be honest, who amongst us has felt themselves this past year? Maybe for a day, a week, or a month, you just haven't felt yourself. And it makes sense. It's been quite a year. Now, if that sounds like you, you're not alone, because mental health challenges have been rapidly on the rise. And we know this at MTV Entertainment because we've been working with mental health experts over the past 10 years to integrate it into our stories to try to make a difference. But you see, not one of us can solve this problem alone. It's going to take all of us. And that is the exciting part. Because as we lock arms as creatives, we will be better together. And that's why we're here today, so that we can make a difference. You see, the problem isn't mental health. The problem is we're not talking about it enough. And that's one of the reasons it's a silent epidemic. If we only talked about mental health in the way that we talked about physical health, we would all be in a much better place. Because the more that we can talk about mental health and the more that we can show it, the more that we can realize that it's something that impacts all of us. And it's something that we can then begin to do to get help for ourselves and for people around us to make positive steps. So what does this have to do with content? Well, I ask you to lean back and think about the last book you couldn't put down, the last character in a show that you just felt that you were one with, or when you were transported into another world with a great movie. That's the gift that content can give. We give people the ability to walk in another person's shoes, give them understanding and empathy of their own experiences. That is what we do collectively as creatives. We give that gift. And if we can apply that superpower to telling mental health stories, we can help our audiences and ourselves get the help that we all need. Now, storytellers, everyone here has the power to change lives. It may take one small scene change, nuanced writing of a character, or to take a scene off of the edit floor and bring it back in. That is our collective power. And I know we can do this. When I think back 10 years ago when we started our journey around mental health, I never, ever could have imagined we would be here today with the creatives and storytellers from around the leading entertainment companies from around the world. Not here to compete, but instead locking arms to help solve this problem. And I'm really excited because I know we can do it. And I know it's not going to take 10 years in the future to get it done. I think we're going to look into the future just a few years and think this was that moment. This is where it all started. I couldn't be more thankful or humble to be with this amazing group of creatives. Thank you so much for joining our coalition and for helping to make a difference. Now, we've asked our colleagues from around the industry to tell us a little bit about why mental health is important to them and what they're doing about that. And who better to kick us off than a creative and a storyteller who knows a little bit about the power of changing lives with content. Here's Oprah Winfrey.
Hi, everybody. I am so pleased to be here with you today and with all of these great partners for the first ever Better Together Mental Health Storytelling Summit. We're here to address this important issue of mental health, brain health, mental well-being, and how it's portrayed in storytelling. You know, stories can powerfully impact how we see ourselves and others. They are doing it all the time, whether we recognize it or not. And when those stories are inclusive and authentic, they make a world of difference, move the world into the direction of a better space for us all. So this is why we've asked our colleagues to take a moment to engage in a dialogue about mental health, mental well-being, and wellness, and how storytelling can help destigmatize harmful stereotypes. We all know that mental health is underrepresented in entertainment, and this has created the opportunity for the creative community to be able to step into this space, and we can actually help drive positive change through our storytelling. So that's one of the reasons I've spent the last several years on a book I recently published and co-authored with leading trauma psychiatrist, Dr. Bruce Perry, to help better understand the impact and effect of trauma in order to shift the question from what's wrong with you to the name of the book is called What Happened to You? All important shift in questioning. I have a documentary series in partnership with Prince Harry and Apple TV Plus that will feature illuminating stories to help lift the veil and give hope to viewers who will see that they are not alone. And mental health, mental well-being is going to be a key focus for OWN's newly launched Own Your Health initiative. It's a campaign partnering with health equity leaders to provide tools and resources that we hope will empower Black women in particular to own their health in 2021 and beyond. So after a challenging year marked by all that we've been through, a global pandemic, a long overdue racial reckoning, I think we all owe it to ourselves to prioritize our own mental and emotional health and to look at our communities to do the same. So what I know is that we have the power together to tell stories that will begin to inspire true change. That's the road we're on. That's the journey we want to take.
Well, thank you, Oprah, and thank you for joining us today during the first of what we hope will be many Better Together mental health storytelling summits. I'm Tanika Ray, and I'll be your host during our 3 days together. As someone who is on the front lines of current events that are impacting our society, I'm proud to be a part of this movement, dedicated to telling more authentic and nuanced stories about mental health. Over the past year, leading entertainment companies and mental health experts joined forces to form the Mental Health Storytelling Coalition, which today is launching a first of its kind mental health media guide. Since May is Mental Health Awareness Month, it couldn't come at a more relevant time. This guide will provide content creators with best practices and recommendations for how to expand positive mental health portrayals in their storytelling, with a goal of encouraging viewers to speak up for themselves and their loved ones. During this 3-day summit, you will hear writers, actors, producers, and mental health experts share their perspective on how to approach mental health during every step of production. You will also be able to weigh in at any time during the discussions and panels using the chat tool on your right side. And if you have a question for our experts, there will be an opportunity to get your answers during the Q&A sections. So hold tight. We hope that over the next few days, we can give you not only the inspiration, but also the tools to harness your power as storytellers to change the narrative on mental health. Here to help us kick things off, our first interviewer is an award-winning journalist whose hit show, This Is Life with Lisa Ling, shines a light on American communities that are often unknown or misunderstood. Please welcome Lisa Ling.
Hello, everyone. I'm Lisa Ling, and welcome to our first conversation of this 3-day summit. And I just want to let everyone know why we're here. Over the last year, a coalition gathered together to come up with a mental health media guide to provide best practices to content creators. These conversations are for you to understand what best practices exist and how you can thoughtfully portray mental health stories in your future projects. They're meant to inspire and guide stories that will change the narrative around mental health. Our first conversation touches on how comedy can help viewers empathize with those around them. Comedy has been a window to the soul since the beginning of humankind, when our ancestors started drawing on rocks. It can evoke powerful emotions that allow us to break down complex ideas and experiences and develop a shared understanding. In particular, comedy gives us a way to look at parts of the human condition that might be difficult to discuss, like our experiences with mental health issues. While it's okay to find humor in the challenging experiences or conditions many people face, it's also within our power to be mindful of how to portray these people who live with these challenges. Chuck Lorre and Kenya Barris are two such content creators that make us laugh time after time with their witty dialogue and situational hilarity. But through the chuckles, they also create unique opportunities to convey helpful and necessary messages about some of life's most critical issues in a way that resonates. Welcome, Chuck Lorre and Kenya Barris. It is such an honor for me.
Hey, how are you?
Thank you so much for joining us. Kenya, your show, ABC's Blackish, has really sparked a national conversation around how people of color view mental health and the idea of seeking help. So can you just talk about some of the positive feedback you've received from viewers about how this show has changed their views on reaching out for help?
Yeah, I was, I think when we started doing Blackish, one of the things that was really important for us is to try to tell stories that felt like grounded in reality and grounded within our own personal sort of place and experiences we went through. And I think we all sort of sat around and talked, people from all, ethnicities and cultures. But the thing that we found about Black culture and also it felt like minority cultures a lot of times is that therapy was not a part of our world. You know what I'm saying? It was if you, felt like you were depressed or whatever, it was go take a bath or, go to church, go take a nap. You know what I'm saying? Like the idea of, that wasn't maybe it was from a financial place, a socioeconomic place. It wasn't something that you leaned into, but it's a part of, our well-being and our bodies just as well as like getting a cold or getting sick, but it's not something that we had ever really, as a culture, we're not comfortable with. And so that family having sort of socioeconomically broken into like the middle class, place, they were now the first part of their family that sort of leaned into like, we can talk about this and we can have conversations about like not feeling right, because crazy is like a word that's, it's a pejorative and it's not, it often makes you not want to be put into that category. So you don't talk about it but it was, people, a lot of the things we talked about, people would respond and the responses we got were like, thank you, because I didn't know that I could comfortably go talk about this or talk to a therapist or deal with my anger or deal with this or deal with my insecurities. And so I think that was, for me, in a way that I felt like I was just talking about from my personal experiences. I didn't know that it was so ubiquitous, in the culture, but I think that it gave people permission in a way that I was really happy to sort of like try and go seek out help and seek something that they might have not done because they felt like they were part of a bigger conversation that they didn't even know they were part of.
That really is such a testament to the power of television, right? Something that you're watching in your own home, and to watch a show and these characters that you identify with normalize the conversation about therapy and seeking help. I imagine just the incredible impact it can have. And Chuck, you really are a category unto yourself, unto its own in this business. You just have this incredible knack for creating characters that have emotional idiosyncrasies that viewers can really relate to. So with your comedic magic, you're able to make struggles endearing and authentic. Your characters just support one another throughout these difficult emotional experiences and often disagreements. So how do you hope this impacts your viewers' thoughts about the need for family and peer support?
I've often said, and I believe this to be true, that there's no situation in comedy that isn't actually a show about a family. Whether or not there's a blood relationship involved, the characters behave like a family or like the family we wish we had, in that that one of the things we did on The Big Bang Theory for many, many years, and it was probably by accident or just the ease of which we could do it, is they always ate together. The characters broke bread together, which is what families do, or used to. They shared a meal together, and that was a communal experience that is kind of has disappeared to some extent. And when you watch people do it on television, there's an aspirational tone to, the family.
Did you
heart.
do that purposely?
I think, Kenya, to be completely honest, it probably was an accident. It was probably, a means to, how do you do it? You don't have the budgets on these things to go off and it's not a film, it's not a movie, it's a little play. And so having them eat together was a chance to have them interact, to have them either make each other miserable or support one another or share information, do all the things that a family does. And over time, I realized what we were doing. I think, in hindsight, I realized we were evoking a family. And they're not related to one another, but they behave like a family. But the emotional support of being together over food was again, I think the word I keep coming back to is aspirational. You watch it and you wish you were there. I can remember watching Cheers and having this bizarre feeling, boy, I'd like to sit there with Norm and Cliff and Sam and Woody and be part of that little family. And there was a show about a bar where no one got drunk, but they operated like a little family unit, and it drew you in. It just even toxic characters like on Seinfeld, they drew you in because they hung together. And
yeah, it's interesting. The moment you said it, I started thinking about your shows. I'm like, there is that. Oh yeah, Mom, they're doing that. It is a interesting thing, and it's also interesting because that is a cross-cultural thing. You know what I'm saying? I think that people sit down cross-culturally, and when they take in food and libations, like there is a sort of therapeutic nature to that. You know what I'm saying? Like it's one of, it's, you look at Sopranos or Godfather, you know what I'm saying? Or you look at whatever, a foreign movie, when people sit down and they eat, it is sort of like this communal therapeutic session, of we're refueling our
the
bodies.
Audience and the audience is occupying that additional seat at that table.
You're sitting at the table.
And that's
I love that.
It's powerful. Kenya, in season 2 of Grownish, Aaron decides to have a dorm meeting on mental health after a classmate contemplates suicide. And at first the students laugh it off, but he breaks through to them when he asks if anyone has ever felt like a sad rapper. And I just wonder if you can explain why it was important to use pop culture as this kind of gateway to speak about mental health challenges.
I think, it's interesting because rap has been sort of a lot of it's the griots of the neighborhood, and they sort of tell you stories. But at its core, right, as hard as rappers are supposed to be, they're poets, which is the softest thing in the world. You know what I'm saying, when you really think about it. And I've become friends with, there's this rapper, Kid Cudi, and he kind of was like the sort of godfather of like emo rap. He's like a sad rapper. Drake kind of became the Michael Jackson version of that, like talking about his feelings. But the notion of being able to, what he did, and he sort of opened up a lot of stuff for kids, and now a lot of rappers sort of talk about it, is to be able to sort of take something that was all braggadocious and talking, about I'm the best and the biggest and the brightest, but there was a movement, especially with younger culture, to say, I'm also a person who's thinking about like, I've been sad for 10 days, which means I'm depressed, or I'm thinking about like maybe not being here, so I'm having suicidal thoughts, or I'm thinking about my father not being here for me, or my mom passed. The idea of that conversation, I think when you put it into that form for those kids, it opened them up differently than the idea of talking about therapy. Because they could understand the idea, oh yeah, Cudi talks about this, or Juice WRLD talked about this, or this, So I think it was sort of speaking to them on their, in their eye gaze, and I think that's the key, is making people understand the idea of it's okay to talk to someone, but making them understand it in a way that they would relate to, and I think that's what he did with that moment. And I think that was, college suicide. It was coming off of USC, it had, at that time, my daughter was at USC, still at USC, but at that time they had like a rash of suicides suddenly. And you had all these, kids nowadays, I will say, they probably have more pressure on them than more than any generation since like the Vietnam War. And I think that you have kids who have all these things going on and all these pressures and the pressure to sort of succeed quicker than ever before. And the outlets are not there for them. And, we create these things in colleges called safe spaces, which really just become echo chambers and are the least safe spaces, because being in a place where everybody speaks the same language and has the same thoughts of you, you don't grow. And doesn't also allow you to sort of be different. You kind of want to stay in the lane that you're supposed to be in. So I think that's what he was trying to do, is try to open it up and speak to them in a way that made them sort of say, oh, I felt like that before. So that was the notion behind it.
Yeah, Kenya, I was following that rash of suicides at USC. In fact, a friend of mine is the interfaith faith chaplain there. And he's been talking about how over the years, kids just aren't interacting with each other anymore because they're just on their devices and they're trying to kind of live up to these images on social media, for example, that are just unattainable, unachievable. And that there really is a crisis going on college campuses where students are literally not, they aren't able, they don't even know how to communicate. So schools are now starting classes like looking at, and teaching people how to look into each other's eyes and to start conversations in college, because young people are so many of them are so stifled socially. So thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely, and I think that looking at it.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I just think we're at a time right now where social media has put such a pressure on young people. You know what I'm saying? Because it's capturing the best moments of people's lives and presenting them like that's every moment. And I feel like if you're a kid and you're following that, or people are following you and someone, says like you don't have enough best moments to collect to sort of be part of the group, like that in itself, it just shows like, I have 3 daughters and 3 sons, and I particularly see it for my daughters because they're older, but my sons are in the same aspects. Like, it's a heavy pressure world for kids, and social media is something that we never really had to deal with at that particular time in my life. I don't know what I would have done. So
the bliss of ignorance growing up. When I grew up, I mean, we were in our little bubbles of sorts, and we were allowed to. I was anyway. My ignorance was a shield. I had no idea that what I was doing, where I was going, or how I was going to get there. But I wasn't being bombarded by the world, which you are now. You're constantly being exposed to the entire world. And I don't think we're equipped for that. I think our neurons are wired that way.
It's so interesting.
It's hard to think freely anymore because you've got a device that's thinking for you.
Sure.
And it's broken up.
We've outsourced the frontal lobe. Yeah.
It's broken up into age, into the age range. You know what I'm saying? I went to, a couple weeks ago, I went to SNL, and Kid Cudi, who's a friend of mine, was performing. And he had a dress on, and it was an homage because I think it might have been the anniversary of Kurt Cobain's performance on there. And I posted the picture on my social media, and thousands of comments. But it was so interesting that it was split right down the middle between, I'd say 35, 36 people under were like, fire emojis and this is amazing. 35, 36 over were like, man in a dress again, you know what I'm saying? Black man cast to be in a, I'm saying? Like it just, it was so interesting that so many people felt like they had to say something and had to comment on it. And, and I was like, this was an artist expressing himself. He did a great performance and it was an homage to something, but it becomes this sort of like, if he was a person who was sitting there looking through all the comments, the idea of if I had to do that growing up, I can't tell you what I would have become.
It's traumatizing, and cancel culture is, I honestly can't imagine being a young person growing up in cancel culture right now, because it is just, it's terrifying. I mean, it starts to affect every aspect of your life and your outlook on life. So I appreciate you for taking these issues on in your shows because of the impact that this kind of a media can have. And on that note, Chuck, I want to ask you about your show, Mom, because it's a show about women battling addiction who are just really open about their struggles to remain sober. And the show it follows their growth and their setbacks, and we've gotten to watch them work to build healthier lives and relationships for themselves. So I wonder why you felt it was important, in light of how addiction is viewed in society today, to show and be so open about overcoming these struggles.
The premise of the show was one word, and the word was hope. Whatever else we did, comedically or story-wise, the emphasis was on subliminally making clear that there's hope, that there is recovery from alcoholism and drug addiction, that it's not a death sentence. It can be, and it often is, but it doesn't have to be. And again, these women, to me, the metaphor for these women are people in a life raft pulling each other in out of the water and hanging on to one another in turbulent waters. And there's joy and there's laughter in their recovery. There's more than the simple fact of sobriety. There's a life worth living. And again, going back to the idea of family, there is a surrogate family, not the family you were born into. Although, the Anna Faris and Allison Janney are mother and daughter, and that's from how the title of the show came about. But for the rest of the ensemble, they care for one another as a family does, and they also make each other miserable, as you have in a family. And there's, there are relationship problems and sexual problems and money problems and depression and all kinds of just the day in, day out stuff that is better dealt with others, not alone. And that was, again, the other promise that's evoked in this 12-step show is that you don't have to do any of this alone. In fact, loneliness is a choice. You don't have to live alone. You don't have to face sobriety alone, marriage alone, divorce alone, illness alone, money problems alone, sexual problems alone. You can face it with people who care for you and don't want anything in return other than to care for you. Altruism. And that was a joy to do for 8 years. We just wrapped the final episode of our final season. And it was very bittersweet to end the show. I really did love that opportunity to do that.
Well, it's an incredible show. And go ahead, Kenya.
I just really appreciate that show because it talked about, in a way, the lineage of alcoholism, you know what I'm saying, in a really sort of way it was just, it was very subtle, you know what I'm saying? But that is, the idea that we often do sort of forget that, like, parents of alcohol, alcoholics often are children of alcoholics who were children of alcoholics, you know what I'm saying? Who, like, the idea of that. And I think that is, a part of the same thing with mental illness, you know what I'm saying? Same, these are things that sort of, like, a lot of times these are inherited things that are in our DNA, and that, like, it gave you a little bit of, oftentimes, the shame and guilt of that. It gave you a little bit of idea sometimes it doesn't just start with you. You know what I'm saying?
Right. And if it's not on you specifically, it's not yours alone, that shame and guilt has a chance to evaporate.
Yes.
Yeah, I thank you for reminding all of us that you don't have to be alone. I think it's really hard. It's really easy to lose sight of that, especially during these times when we have been isolated from people for so long. So thank you for that, Chuck. Kenya, in Blackish, when Dre's wife, Rainbow, suffers from postpartum depression, Dre shows his support first by hilariously suggesting they take a magazine quiz and then seriously provides the name of a specialist. So I was wondering what you were trying to convey with that scene and what you hope were the biggest takeaways.
I think, I went through that myself, and I wasn't, it's a hard thing, especially as a guy, because, I don't we don't have the kids, but sometime when you're asking or you think someone might need something more than what they're doing or some help, it's hard when you suggest it because it seems like a indictment. So the magazine quiz was like, hey, let's see what this magazine, this is an interesting, he was sort of subtly trying to introduce that topic that wasn't his idea. This is Cosmo saying this or whatever, but because you don't want to indict someone, you want someone to sort of kind of maybe come to it on their own. And I think that was, his attempt, as we often are, ham-fisted in how we do it, but it was his attempt to sort of trying to subtly get into it and then let it be her idea, which I think is often the trick of the trade, is sort of like a person has to sort of sometime find it on their own and come to that place on their own. And so that was where we were coming from. For me, it was a really, really scary time. I had never experienced it before. When my wife went through postpartum, I knew something was off. I didn't really know how to explain it. I didn't know really what it was, but I wanted her to be able to feel comfortable in talking about it. And the idea that there was maybe something else that she could see that other people had gone through, maybe it would open the conversation up for her to be more comfortable talking to me about it.
Well, then, Kenya, Rainbow's mother-in-law apologizes to her for calling her weak for receiving help for her postpartum depression. And she tells her that she was the weak one for not helping her get help. So what do you think the perceptions, or what are the perceptions you hope viewers come away with around mental health issues and the role that we can play for those who are struggling as support?
I think that, the idea, it goes back to what Chuck was saying about being alone, you know what I'm saying? And I think generationally, the idea around mental health has so shifted. It used to be looked at as like you were weak, you know what I'm saying? Or if you had addiction or, any type of mental illness, like it was a weakness. And you because of that, if you were going through this, you suffered through it alone. And I feel like the mom admitted that she went through, finally, after having her sort of breakthrough moment, she admitted that she went through what Rainbow was going through, but she wasn't strong enough to actually go and tell people because you're supposed to just deal with it. You know what I'm saying? And I think oftentimes women in particular, their issues are theirs to bear. You know what I'm saying? Because other women before them have done it and not had to do this, so why can't you? It's just, it's the most natural thing in the world, and having a kid, you can't do it without needing to go talk to a doctor. And so, I think there's so many things like that that I feel like, even from from a feminist standpoint, oftentimes I question the idea of feminism in some of the aspects because it sort of prescriptively tells you what to do. And to me, that's anti-feminist. Feminism should be sort of allowing people to, women to do what they need to do for themselves in their way. And I dealt with it like when we first started breastfeeding, there was like a group that comes around to the rooms and like almost shames you into if you're not breastfeeding. And if a mom couldn't breastfeed, she would feel, less than and things like that. So I think it was going back to what Chuck was saying, it's making her try and feel is not alone, and that this was part of a bigger conversation that people were having around the world. So that was the point behind it.
Kenya, I am so loving you right now. Because it is so true. You are speaking exactly right. You are hitting on something that so many women struggle with, and because there's so much pressure around motherhood and childbirth and things like breastfeeding, and it is so true. I mean, the pressure isn't coming from men. The pressure is coming from women, and often it's self-imposed. So I so appreciate your sensitivity on this, and your willingness to share, because I think that it's a message that women need to hear. It's a message that men need to hear. So thank you for that, truly. And Chuck, so I just have to ask you how your personal experiences might play in crafting the characters that you create.
Laughter is therapeutic. It just is. If you can cause some laughter in somebody's life for 22 minutes, or that's about as much time as we have on a network comedy, then then you've introduced the possibility of a moment of mental health, because laughter is, I think we all agree, is the greatest medicine, no matter what's going on. And if you can laugh at others, or if seeing what they're going through causes you to laugh at yourself because you identify it as a universality to what we experience, then we've provided a service, and without meaning to. We try and make you laugh. That's what we do. I never want to stray too far from that.
Well, Chuck, as one of the true greats in this business, when did you realize that? Like, when did you realize that by making people laugh, you could really take on some really hard things? Like, did you have a moment where it would just be like an epiphany or anything like that?
I think it was an evolution for me. It took place over many years, and I've been fortunate to be doing this for many years. There are subject matters that we take on now without a second thought that 20 years ago, 25 years ago, would have been unthinkable. We did an episode on Mom early on where Mimi Kennedy's character was going for treatment for breast cancer. And the word itself was a word you wouldn't say when I started in this business a long time ago. You wouldn't even say the word. It wouldn't ever be something that would. Norman Lear probably dealt with it, what is it, almost 45 years ago or something like that. But in the culture I came up in television, it was unthinkable. But here we were, and we wanted to tackle it. And ultimately, the way we did it was Allison Janney and Anna Faris's character want to be of service to her. They want to be supportive. And the comedy came from their inability or their narcissism for so many years had not taught them how to be useful to another human being. So that's where the comedy was, because it would have been glib to be comedic about cancer. But the comedy came from people wanting to do right by their friend and not actually knowing how, and sometimes making things worse, but their efforts were coming from a good place. It was their lack of experience. And so in recovery, you start to recognize that there's other people out there and their welfare actually is meaningful to you. But how to proceed with enhancing their welfare, that's an entirely different subject. You have no tools whatsoever, and you're learning on the job, and the chaos of that is hopefully where this, the audience could feel comfortable laughing. But I completely strayed from what your question was.
Well, no, I mean, it's really when did you realize that you could use comedy to take on some of these really difficult topics? And it's interesting because you said it's an evolution, but I wonder now, right, that there has been more opportunity to take on these difficult things. If you think, or you feel sometimes compelled to address a certain thing, a certain maybe mental health challenge, and then you figure out the comedy around it. There's Kenya will understand this. Part of what we do is write ourselves into a corner and then try and write out. You get yourself up that tree and then try and figure out how to get down. And I think over time, for me, I wanted to take on more challenging material, just so I wouldn't get bored, frankly. So, did the kids do their homework? You can only write that story so many times, or somebody, one of the kids got in trouble at school and we got to go talk to the teacher. You can only do that a couple of times before you go, I think I've done this story and I don't want to do it anymore. And so you start looking for stories that may be more meaningful. And in so doing, you find yourself in the corner and going, okay, we've tackled this subject. How do we make it funny?
Can we make it funny without being glib and disrespectful? And that makes writing enjoyable and producing enjoyable, because if you can pull that off, there's a great deal of satisfaction, of personal satisfaction, of having walked into the darkness and gotten back out, and hopefully achieve goal number one, which is to generate laughter.
It's funny what Chuck is saying, because we call the writer's room this. You ever do an escape room? You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
that's basically what the writer's room is. You know what I'm saying? Like, you put yourself into an escape room and you have a certain amount of, time to get out of it. You know what I'm saying? That's the time to write the script and the time to sort of, whether or not you get out of it, you never really know. You know what I'm saying? But you feel comfortable within the writer's room that you've done the best that you can to sort of figure out the puzzle to the question that you pose to yourself. And it's interesting.
Sounds like an incredible family experience, right? In that writer's room to tackle these things collectively.
It is a family experience, and I think what Chuck said is really, interesting. That he was like, the things we talked about now, we wouldn't talk about 25 years ago, and then he went back and said, well, Norman Lear would have done it, because there was a time, and it's so sort of like the melody of what networks and what the sort of powers that be want, because there was a time when Norman Lear and that sort of television dominated what it was, and that was all about sort of dealing with issues. And then suddenly, I don't know if it's because of the selling of soap and what the soap buyers said that they were willing to have or whatever, we sort of wiped out talking about issues, and it became television was escapism, which is a word that was sort of created for what. That was the only way to entertain people, was to make them escape from their daily problems. And then all of a sudden you start realizing that Chuck comes back and some of the shows are on their top, the people are actually more drawn in by having comedy give them a spoonful of sugar that deals with their real life. But there was this period of time where all of a sudden it's like, let's not deal with reality. Let's give people something that takes them away from real life. And it's interesting to me, because right now we're back at a place where I think, again, we're going to start having a dose, because of what's going on in the world, of people want to feel like they can see curtains pull back and have real conversations. And I do think there's ebbs and flows and, mountains and valleys.
Well, I think I think what you two are doing is providing both. And it's kind of this unique genre where you can allow people to escape, but not forget that there could be some sort of serious issues at play. I mean, I think you two have really championed that in such a profound way. I mean, Kenya, in Blackish, Dre, he confronts his own struggles with depression while trying to prove that he doesn't need therapy, right? Because anger is his outlet, and using comedy, you were able to show how Dre's anger would only lead to further emotional distress. And I mean, they're funny scenes, but at the root, you're taking on some very deeply felt emotions and things that Dre has been going through.
Yeah, I think it comes from the idea of, once again, it's interesting that Chuck brought up, is it keeps coming back to the number one human fear is being alone, and that's around the world. And the idea that oftentimes we make excuses for our flaws and things like that by saying that's just how I deal with things, and that works for me. And I think that's what Dre was doing. I think that's what a lot of people I grew up with. I know that's things that I did. I used my sort of anger at the world, or anger at my dad, or anger at this, and I was like, well, the fact that I get angry is me emoting, and that's a good thing. And I didn't really want to lean into, and the character doesn't want to lean into the idea that maybe he has some anger issues. And I think there's something funny to that, but at the same time, there's something really real, in that you taking, whenever you have a moment to look at yourself in the mirror in which you don't necessarily don't like what you see, it's a real moment. And I feel like that is what we're asking all these characters to do. And sometimes the other people that they're bouncing these ideas off are their mirror, and I think that they help them get through and see things in themselves they wouldn't necessarily see, because they are family and they make them feel not alone. But I feel like that for me, being a Black guy in America, like there is my dad and grandmother, like they were, beyond constantly angry. And it just was like, that was just what you were supposed to be, because, it wasn't easy. And like, you were supposed to be not smiling and things like that. But we now know that that's not just, you don't have to live in that place. And I think that's what Dre was sort of coming out of the fog of seeing, is that he's in a new generation. He doesn't have to live with his anger. And it was a really fun story to do, but it was based around, I think, reality and having something to say, and the notion that, one of my favorite shows of yesterday was the Honeymooners, and Ralph Kramden, saying one more time, that was, we did a joke on it, like, he was threatening to punch his wife in the face. I feel like America laughed every week at it, but I mean, if, the joke was that if Dre did that as a Black man, like you can't say that. You can't tell him, you say one more thing, I'm just, but that was how we were as a society. That was sort of the funny thing. And I kind of think we're now at a place where it's like, let's examine that. Let's look into that. Let's look at why that was okay. I'm doing Richard Pryor movie, and I don't know how big of a fan of Pryor you were. I was a huge fan.
Huge, yeah.
The notion that he had a very successful career as a derivative of Bill Cosby, who was the safe, sort of affable, acceptable Black man, and Pryor just became a derivative of him. And the Pryor that we all actually end up becoming to know and love was the Pryor when he said, I'm going to actually talk about my life, and I'm going to sort of deal with the stuff and my demons on stage. And that became, comedy is derivative of that, and has not really changed since then. You know what I'm saying? He was the Michael Jordan of that, and sort of really actually taking a really dark and sad place and bringing it to light, and making Black America, white America, gay, straight, this and that, actually putting them indicting. I always say going to a Pryor concert was like being in an open carry state. You know what I'm saying? Because everybody had a gun, and you knew he got, you knew that, before you pull your gun out, everyone else has one, and he sort of armed everybody with that. And I kind of think that is the writers that I really appreciate, and the shows I really appreciate. They make, when you watch them, an open carry state, because they're not pulling back. You know what I'm saying? They're calling.
Kenya, what kind of an impact did Pryor have on you? I mean, you're so right. No one was more candid and just overt about the things that he was going through than Richard Pryor. How did he impact you? Because you do the same in your shows.
I mean, to me, Norman Lear, Richard Pryor, are why I sort of where my sort of voice and things I sort of took from. I feel like the idea that this really flawed character, this really sort of damaged guy in Pryor, who had this really dark, upbringing that he came out from, brought it to stage and did it in a way so selflessly and so honestly that everybody cross-culturally could see it, and now to this day, everyone's still chasing that. I kind of feel like that was, for me, what I, would love to do and try to do as a writer. And I'm not always as bold and able to do that, but, I kind of feel like it's hard sometimes because, we're all writers are people and we all have our flaws, but the art that they're able to come from, the art that they're able to achieve, I feel like sometimes no forgiveness of anyone's flaws, but like, if we're going to start not, we have to close the museums, you know what I'm saying? Just lock them up right now if we're not going to separate the art from this, you know what I'm saying? And what Pryor did for me was give me the sort of freedom to try to say, like, I want to talk about things that I'm afraid to talk about. That's what makes them fun. You know what I'm saying? That I'm like, I'm a little bit scared. I'm a little bit nervous to talk about this, but let's find the funny in it. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's when when you feel like you're doing something good, when you're a little bit scared. When it's not scary, it doesn't feel as satisfying.
And Chuck, did you have, are there certain people who have helped guide you in the work that you do?
Well, I'm a baby boomer, so some of the biggest influences, and I didn't know it at the time, were the comics I saw because I because on Sunday night, my dad put on Sullivan, and I got to see this whole generation of stand-up comics who, you know, Shecky Green and Nipsey Russell and Stilla and Mira and Newhart and on and on and on Sunday nights. I was exposed to the comedy of that generation, and had a big impact on me. But I actually didn't want to have anything to do with television when I was coming out of high school. At the time, it was music. The greatest things that were happening, as far as I could tell, were in music. And then everything changed when around 1970 or so, I heard Randy Newman for the first time. And I went, music can have a point of view. It can make you laugh. It can make you think. It can be perverse in a way. And I really thought I was hoping against hope, but that was something that I could pursue. And I actually stumbled into television kind of backwards, and coming out of music. And again, the great comics had a point of view.
Do you have any advice to give to creators who are striving for authenticity and depicting characters who may have mental health challenges on screen? Chuck, any advice?
The script that got me work, the script that got my career going, was a Spec Golden Girl. That's how far back I'm going. Because for two reasons. I loved the show. I thought it was brilliant, and it made me laugh.
One of the best.
And I love these characters. And two, I pulled something from my own life with my parents, and I put it in that script. I took this. I don't get caught up in the weeds here, but I lifted something that I'd experienced, and I put it in a script, and it grounded the script. I mean, I was writing jokes like crazy, trying to convince somebody that I could do this, but the heart of the script was something I'd gone through with my mom and dad. And so some part of it rang true, and I got work as a result. I started working. I sent it to Golden Girls, and it came back with a toe tag on it. It wasn't no part of it, but that's okay. I was really proud of it because I don't know why, but I actually don't know why. I drew from my own life and tried to bring it into this world with these characters. And really the theme of the episode was guilt, surprisingly enough, and remorse. And so that worked for me. There's probably a myriad of ways you can go about trying to get a foothold. But that worked for me, was reaching into my own life to find a story that I wanted to tell, that I could be excited about telling, that I was determined to tell. I think to write for any other reason is probably a futile act. Don't emulate other people. That's the other thing is, when you read somebody's script, and you can see they're simply emulating what they've seen. They haven't even approached having a voice. And when you find somebody with a voice, you wrap your arms around them and you never let them go, because that's genuinely rare and a wonderful thing. And so I'm rambling. So I'm
you can spot the authenticity.
On page one.
I think that's when you said your first love was everything was music. I think there's a lot of synergy between music and writing, because music at its core is, especially the writing and the lyrics and things like that. But music has always been, at every level, the rawness of it, that's always, come through. You know what I'm saying? And the stories are told because when it hits you at an emotional place. You know what I'm saying? And I think good writing kind of hits you at that same emotional place. And, in terms of being able to tell stories, I think that normalize or make it okay to talk about mental illness. I think that it is, when you can talk about it from your own personal experiences, I think that also, you can back that up to whoever you're talking to. You're like, well, I experienced this, and I can't say that everyone's going to do it, but I can tell you what I experienced. And I think that, writing from a place of like, you want to do good. You want to, you want to sort of help someone maybe through your own experiences or through experience that you felt, you know what I'm saying? I feel like the really thing. And I think also, I'm really a big believer in this, and Chuck was talking about, we're not going to be physicists, but make sure that you're accurate. You know what I'm saying? I think that, oftentimes people sort of quote things or do things and they're sort of not necessarily, I'm like, that's an inaccurate statement and that can potentially be harmful. You know what I'm saying? Because it hasn't necessarily as a responsibility they have, especially when you're talking about something like this, that there's still so much to be learned. Like, make sure that you have actually done the research to at least what you're saying, it's based in some form of accuracy, because people listen to television, you know what I'm saying? And people see things and people take it as, gospel, and I think that there is a level of accuracy that is needed when you get this responsibility and this power to sort of at least try in those aspects to be, make sure that you're being responsible with it.
Yeah, because it's in our most sacred places, right? In our homes.
Yes.
Chuck Lorre, Kenya Barris, I cannot tell you what an honor it's been to just inhabit this small space in your brilliant minds today. Thank you so much for sharing your stories and sharing your process. It's been hugely, hugely illuminating. I so appreciate it.
Thank you, Lisa. Good seeing you, Chuck.
Good to see you, Kenya.